Om Shri Ram Jai Ram Jai Jai Ram. Om Shri Ram Jai Ram Jai Jai Ram. Om Shri Ram Jai Ram Jai Jai Ram. Victory to God, victory to the light. God bless you. May light and love and joy spread through this earth in perfect harmony with purest spirit. Om Shri Ram Jai Ram Jai Jai Ram. Lovely to be talking to you all at the Spirit Mountain, and or rather they call it Superstition Mountain, but really it is considered a spiritual vortex by the local tribes here, and very happily ensconced here now. We have a new CrossandLotus journal that is out, and very happy with it, and I hope you are too. I'd like to read to you from the Dear Friends. Life is so interesting when you live surrendered to God. I wrote an entire Dear Friends letter for the journal, but as I looked it over, I knew that the words I wrote were all right, but it did not have the resonance that comes when something is an expression of the highest truth and upliftment in God. So I threw that one in the garbage and started over. Let's see what God does this time. This recognition of when something manifests God's higher truth brings up the idea of discernment, knowing when you are in harmony with God. It is one of the big questions for those starting out on the path and becomes even more important as we ascend to higher levels of consciousness. I have been the witness to enough aspirant sadhanas, including my own, to know the number of ways it can go sideways, destroying progress and creating chaos in its wake. In some cases, there is a blatant disregard for even the basic principles of spiritual living that anyone with basic common sense would know are signs of getting off track for realizing God. I have seen the start or return to alcoholism, use of drugs, and promiscuous sex. All of this after attaining some very high states of consciousness. Of course, these go against the very basic rules Mother gave us as Kriya initiates. No one would be surprised, when viewed dispassionately, that these actions denote a fall back into worldly consciousness, and in some cases I have seen great dissipation and even death. The lure of the world tempting aspirants is an interesting field of study. For many sadhakas, the mind convinces you that a wrong is a right. Either that or you simply don't care in the moment what the consequences are. You want what you want. That it may ruin your life, the lives of others, none of that matters. How in the world can an otherwise intelligent, sensitive, and usually sincere devotee think in this way? It is a great mystery. I've known devotees of many of the greatest spiritual masters in the last century given to such things, not only making poor decisions, but disastrous ones. During Papa's sadhana, he said that he had but one fear, and it was a big one, that he would forget God. This worked on him in such a way that there were many nights he did not sleep at all, remaining awake, chanting God's name, lest he forget God and his presence for even a moment. This is very instructive for us, not that we should never sleep again. That is not likely or possible or useful for the sadhaka, but that we should remain ever alert for the little or big whys in life. One branch in the Y takes us further from God, the other closest to Him. It can be as simple as that. Does this make me feel closer to God and the masters, or further away? This temptation can come in a whisper, a decision to ignore God's inner warning or guidance, or it can hit us like a full-speed charging locomotive, blowing us off course with wild abandon. For either of these, we must be strict with ourselves, never wandering off course, no matter how seemingly small or powerful the temptation is. In the beginning of your spiritual quest, you are given some commandments or principles to go by, to love God, and to love God in your neighbor, not to lust after another, serve someone in need as you would the Christ or Master or Mother, tell the truth, don't steal. I think we all know these basic do's and don'ts. These are the rules to go by, and you benefit when you abide by them. One of the ultimate benefits of being in line with the commandments and living a sincere life is that your mind is purified, which leads to the development of an intuition for right action and thought. A feeling deep down that tells you, beyond your mind, that you are drawing closer to God. As you know, I am a fan of Marie Kondo and her joy of tidying. She has an interesting approach to choosing the things you keep as your possession. You pick up one item in your hands, sense whether it brings you a spark of joy. If yes, it goes in the keep pile. If no, it goes out. She has you start with clothing because in general, this does not have a lot of sentimental value and allows you to hone your intuitive joy skills. As you go through all your household items one by one and category by category, you come to the last area and the one many people find most difficult, sentimental items. By this time, you have gone through so many of your belongings that you have developed your intuition for what sparks joy. Now you are ready to apply it even to the most challenging sentimental items. This method is good practice for fine-tuning intuition and for ultimately knowing God's will. Intuition is a natural inborn faculty we all have. However, in so many cases, intuition is dulled by wrong living. Some people let strong personalities around them dominate. Others are afraid of what others will think. Alcohol and drugs dull this sense. Constant noise and stimulation, such as television and music, can make it difficult to tune into it. Some project responsibility on signs in the world, saying, I started this project, but obstacles came up, and I think this is the universe telling me I should not do it. I have to tell you, I'm quite skeptical of such outer signs. It is better to hone your intuitive skills for which you know deep down to be true. In the area of intuiting God's will, there is no substitute for deepened meditation and life experience. As with any experiential living, you will be learning, as with any experiential learning, you will make mistakes. However, do not be fearful or discouraged. God has assured me that sincerity is our greatest ally in this task. When you make mistakes, sincerity reveals the error. Humility redirects you to the right path, and a clear, firm will puts you back on track. As your intuition is refined in deepest meditation, you touch the fabric of God's presence. You discover a touchstone in that presence in which you will absolutely know the truth about something when you hear it, see it, or experience it, within or without. I remember there was a saint from India that Mother had told me about in some unflattering terms. When I was at Anandashram, I picked up one of his books from the library, interested to see what I thought about his writings, as he had a good reputation with many. I read the words. They sounded all right, but the truth is they lay flat on the page. They did nothing to lift my consciousness. I put the book down and left well enough alone. I did not and do not have time for something that does not lift me directly to God. So make it a priority to practice discernment in all parts of your life. First, through reason, the rules, then through meditation-born intuition. Practice, practice, practice. Daily put yourself to the test. Does this lift me closer to God or take me further away? You may be surprised at some little things in your life that you discover must be put behind you. Then other things are all right for you. You pay attention to your thoughts and words and actions. Does this lift me up in God experience, or does it interfere with continuous God remembrance? This is live practice. So it is refining what fits at this time, in this place. At one time, something may fit perfectly. Another time, it is to be discarded. It can seem fickle, but actually, it is all working to attune you to the purity of spirit. You can no longer just go along with the crowd. It forces you to take a stand on your own judgment. This can be uncomfortable, and it can test you to the extreme, but it leads you to the best and highest version of yourself. I do not know all the reasons why God had me toss out the first draft of Dear Friends, but I do feel certain that this is exactly the one He wants in the journal. In that, I am fulfilled. And from Master's commentary on the Gita, he's talking about his interpretations of the scriptures. In interpreting scripture, one must not, therefore, ignore factual and historical elements in which truth was couched. One must distinguish between an ordinary illustration of moral doctrine or the recounting of spiritual phenomena of that deeper esoteric intent. One has to know how to recognize the signs of the convergence of material illustrations with spiritual doctrines, without trying to drag a hidden meaning out of everything. One must know how to intuit the cues and express declarations of the author, and never fetch out meanings not intended, misled by enthusiasm and the imaginative habit of trying to squeeze spiritual significance from every word or statement. The true way to understand Scripture is through intuition, attuning oneself to the inner realization of truth. My guru and Param Gurus, Swami Sri Yukteswar, Ari Mahashai, Mahavatar Babaji, are rishis of this present age, masters who themselves are God-realized living scriptures. They have bequeathed to the world, along with the long-lost scientific technique of Kriya Yoga, a new revelation of the Holy Bhagavad Gita, relevant primarily to the science of yoga and Kriya Yoga in particular. Mahavatar Babaji, at one with Krishna in spirit, through his grace, intuitively transferred the true knowledge of the Bhagavad Gita to his disciple, Lahari Mahashai, a yoga avatar, incarnation of yoga, through whom he revived for mankind the Kriya science as the technique of salvation for this age. Lahari Mahashai himself never wrote any books, but his divine expositions of the scriptures were expressed through the writings of various of his advanced disciples. Among his greatest disciples, Swami Sri Yukteswar, Swami Pranabhananda, Panchanan Bhattacharya recorded his Gita explanations. The earliest small edition of the Bhagavad Gita, with Lahari Mahashai's interpretation, was brought out by Panchanan Bhattacharya, founder of Arya Mission Institution, Calcutta. Later, my guru, Sri Yukteswarji, a Jnana avatar, incarnation of wisdom, in his elaborate, unrivaled way, explained the most significant first 9 chapters of the Gita according to Lahari Mahashaya interpretation. After that, the great Swami Pranabhananda, the saint with 2 bodies, about whom I wrote in the Autobiography of a Yogi, brought forth an amazing interpretation of Lahari Mahashaya's interpretation of the entire Gita. The eminent yogi Bhupendra Nath Sanyal, whom I personally highly regard, also brought out in a remarkable edition of Lahari Mahashaya's interpretation of the Gita. I have had the blessing to be inspired in the greatest way about Lahari Mahashaya's divine insight and perceptive method of explaining the Gita, which I first learned from my master. Through the help of God-realized Guru, one learns how to use the nutcracker of intuitive perception to crack open the hard shell of language and ambiguity to get at the kernel of truth in scriptural sayings. My Guru, Swami Sri Yukteswar, never permitted me to read with mere theoretical interest any stanza of the Gita or the aphorisms of Patanjali, India's greatest exponent of yoga. Master made me meditate on the scriptural truths until I became one with them. Then he would discuss them with me. Once, when in my enthusiasm I hurried Master to teach me faster, he sharply rebuked me. Go and finish reading the Gita. Why come and study it with me? When I became calm, having stilled my intellectual eagerness, he told me to put myself in rapport with God, as manifested in Krishna, Arjuna, and Vyasa, when the message of the Gita was revealed through them. In this way, through those precious years in my blessed company of my Master, he gave to me the key to unlock the mystery of Scripture. It was from him that I learned how to put myself in tune with Christ, to interpret his sayings as he wanted them to be understood. Master's example was his guru, Lahari Mahashaya. When disciples and students sought instruction from the Yoga Avatar, he used to close his eyes and read aloud from the book of his soul realization. Sri Yukteswar did the same, And that method is what he taught to me. I am grateful to Master for this. For within the soul is a source of infinite realization, which I could not have gleaned in all my life from intellectual study. Now, when I touch my pen or look within and speak, it comes in boundless waves. Master also taught me the specific symbology in just a few verses of the chapter 1 of the Gita and a few related aphorisms of Patanjali. When he saw that I had mastered these through his instruction and my unfolding intuitive perception born of meditation, he declined to teach me further. Early on, he had foretold my work to interpret the Gita. Master said to me, "You don't want to understand and explain the Gita according to your own concepts or with the twistings of the intellect. You want to interpret to the world the actual dialogue between Krishna and Arjuna as perceived by Vyasa and revealed to you." It is so wonderful, these different interpretations that we have had from Mother Hamilton around particularly the Christian scriptures, from Master in particular around the Bhagavad Gita. There are also books written about Larry Mahashai's and his notes that he made and others who made notes of his teachings. It's very interesting to see Larry Mahashai's diary. And in it, he will talk about where he had an inner experience where he saw the spiritual star at the forehead as he meditated deeply. How he saw a individual who was an illumined. It was his own soul, his own spiritual self, the Atman within him that he was seeing, being revealed. He went through so many different experiences. He really delved into the laboratory of his own soul. And he didn't depend on other people and their interpretations of the scriptures. Now, we can get inspiration. We certainly do from Mother's interpretations of the Bible, from Master's interpretation of the Gita, and so on. We get thereby attuned to their consciousness, who in turn are attuned to the consciousness of Christ and of Krishna. Master one time described how he was thinking about the interpretations of the Bible and how Jesus appeared to him, and that there was a cup that came from Jesus to him, and he drank from that cup, and it went back to Jesus, and Jesus said, "We have drunk from the same cup." How beautiful, how wonderful this is. And so it is when you attune yourself. This is the purpose for when we meet our guru, and we really work to attune our consciousness with them, because it is through them that we are taken into the divine consciousness itself. This can be tricky territory for some, or for all, because it is not the individuality of the guru that we look for ultimately to join with. The guru comes as God's messenger, anointed by God, in order to teach the truth to us and give us the means by which we might approach the truth. The first night that I met Mother, she sang on with the harmonium, Om Shri Ram Jai Ram Jai Jai Ram. And in the beginning, I wasn't actually even sure if I liked the tune that she sang. It seemed kind of haunting to me, but I didn't forget it. In fact, it kept coming back to me. And as I sang it mentally, I felt its purifying power. I felt uplifted in it. And within a few months, I was initiated into Kriya Yoga. And these were the means that she had given me. And then she told stories. She told stories about her meeting with saints. She told stories about the interpretation of the Gita, or the scriptures of the Bible, a little bit about the Gita. but mostly about the Christian scriptures, because that is how God had given it to her. She would be lifted up and put through some particular experience. Many times they were very difficult experiences. And when she would be done with the experience, God would take her to the scriptures, and she would open up the scriptures, and then she would read exactly a description in symbolic form of what she had just gone through. And in this way, God taught her the truth about these scriptures. It was over years that I learned about these things. And now we are getting transcripts of her talks. And we're able to look at all these things and put them together so that they can tell the story, her story, of her own experiences, of the revelations of her truth, so that the world might have access to it. And it's a wonderful, wonderful work. But it's interesting to think now, all of these things can be made available to us. But as I was in discipleship with Mother, many of these things came a little bit at a time. And I remember when I came to Sunday service one time, and Mother was giving a talk, and she said, just earlier this week, God gave me a revelation. It was about what is called the missing link. In the theory of evolution, there is this idea that animals gradually evolved, and from that evolution came the ape and the chimpanzee and so forth. And out of those came mankind, but that there has never been a link, a genetic link, or any physical evidence of the link between the chimpanzee or the gorilla or the orangutan and mankind. And that is called the missing link, and it was looked for some time. And Mother said, God gave to me where the missing link came from. It didn't happen in the material world. It wasn't just simply a genetic jump, but rather it happened in the astral world first, where the animal became the human. Now, the human has some unique characteristics in the spine and the brain. And those characteristics are centers of consciousness, centers of power within. And due to those, there is an ability to discern the true spiritual consciousness that is beyond this animal consciousness within. We can soar through the third eye point and there go into Christ's consciousness, and that is unique to mankind. And then we can ascend up into the higher consciousness at the crown of the head, and we can go into pure divine consciousness from there. And these are wonderful, wonderful abilities. And they came when we took incarnation into the astral realm. And we made that jump, we made that link from animal into human. And it made all the difference because now we can aspire to consciously know God. So this is something that God had just shown Mother earlier that week. Isn't that wonderful? And this is the way that God can instruct us. He can teach us. But as Master pointed out, it's not just every little thought that comes through our head that is a revelation from God. I've heard some people talk about their intuitions at times, and they are somewhat doubtful because they don't reflect the kind of upliftment in consciousness that really comes with a revelation from God. When God shows us something, we are lifted up. There is a purity to it. And there are some people who just get one thing after another after another. And it really kind of makes a jumble after a while. I remember somebody who was sitting and they were just talking out loud, and they were talking about ancient civilizations that had lived on that very spot and went on, and there's just nothing uplifting about it. It was just a description that went from one thing to another to another to another. When we get something from God, it changes us. It goes into the very cells of our being. It uplifts us, and it comes as a sudden inspiration, a sudden revelation. It is as if we are sitting in a darkened room, and suddenly somebody turns on the light, and we see as we have never seen before. We understand as we have never understood before. We feel it on the very deep level, and it actually changes us because we are lifted up into direct communion with God. This is no small thing. And it's not necessarily that you always get these things every moment of every day. It's wonderful when it happens. And it should be something that we regard with such sacredness. But we should not play fast and loose with the idea of being directed from God. But neither should we be dismissive of it or think, oh, I could never be like that. I could never get revelations in the way that Mother did. Because the same God that was in Mother is also in you. The same God that was in Master is also in you. The same God that is in Babaji is also in you and in Jesus and in Krishna. Just think of that. Isn't that really inspiring? And you may think about yourself and you think, well, I'm just this little lump of clay. Who am I to get something like that? But that can be God denying God inside of you. Now, that doesn't mean you go out and make something up and say it's God. But neither should you automatically discount it. You should open yourself to the possibility. When you go into meditation, you should think, what does God have for me today? What would He like me to know? What would He like me to experience? What would He like me to be? And you open yourself up to the perfection, to the beauty, to the light, to the upliftment that God is. You should feel that every moment of every day, you have that capacity. Now, this is a great, great practice because to do that means you're putting your mind directly on God and you open yourself. Don't get into a habit with your meditation where you just sit there and you let your mind wander and wander and wander. You're not meditating at all. You're just in the realm of imagination. Don't let yourself get into that habit. Be alive when you go into your meditation. Think, what miracle does God have for me today? Every moment of every day. And this is me entering into the secret sanctum where it's just me and God. You can use your imagination if it helps you. Think about yourself going into an ancient temple. It's been hallowed with so many different saints down through the years. You are walking on sacred ground. You feel the vibrancy of that place. You see, that can help you to attune. And what you're attuning to is your own inner Christ, your own inner Krishna, the Kutastha Chaitanya. Mother one time said a very interesting thing. She was talking about these people who are having what are called near-death experiences. And many times what is described is going through that experience where you die for a short amount of time, perhaps on an operation table, before you are revived. And during that time, you can go through an experience. And it's called a near-death experience. You actually experience what it's like to die. And many people experience sitting or being next to a being who is filled with light and filled with beauty. Now, a Christian might interpret that as being Christ. A Hindu might interpret it as somebody such as Krishna or Rama, depending on their cultural background. But you know what Mother said? Mother said, that is your own inner Christ, the Atman, the beautiful soul. And because you are not yet one with that one, then you project them as being something separate from your own self. Whatever you think about a great spiritual master, whether it be Jesus, whether it be Babaji or Krishna, whatever that might be, that is your own inner Christ self, your own inner Krishna self, your own inner Buddha self. And perhaps because you have not developed to the point where you can accept that one as being your own true self, then you project it as something outside of you and something other than you. But this is something that we intuitively begin to grasp with time. We open ourselves to the fact that there is something tremendous inside of us. There is something powerful inside of us. Now, this is not just the ego talking. In fact, it's just the opposite. Because when we get in touch with that beauty, with that light, with that love, it actually diminishes the ego. Consciousness grows, power within, spiritual power grows inside, but the ego actually diminishes. We become humbled to dust within ourselves. We can no longer be arrogant or egotistical and be in the presence of the Christ. Then darkness can exist in the presence of light. There is the story that is told about the room that was held in darkness for 1,000 years. For 1,000 years, darkness reigned total supreme within that room. One day, the shades were thrown open and the sun came in brilliantly and filled that entire room with light. And where was the power of darkness? Gone, instantly. The speed of light came in and filled it with light. And darkness was gone. And this is a description of what happens within us. We feel ourselves, we feel the pull of this world, we feel the pull of this ego, of this body. Sometimes we feel powerless in its grasp. When we close our eyes, we only see darkness, we don't see light. We feel that we are perhaps even abandoned by God. And then one day, it is as if the drapes have been pulled and the light comes streaming in, and we are filled with that divine consciousness. And perhaps at first it is just a momentary experience. I remember so many years of having experiences, a little bit here and a little bit there. And it was so maddening because when it occurred, when that experience occurred, when I felt uplifted, it was so pure, it was so real, it felt so natural. I felt it must have always been true in me, and it will always be true in me. And then it was as if the curtain would start to drop back again. And I was in a field of separation once again. I was in a room of darkness. And you think, what does it take to get that drape to pull back and to stay back? And so it just drives you on. You try harder. You work to purify your mind in all the ways that you know. And yet it seems like you sit in meditation at times and nothing much happens. But then later in the day, suddenly you just get hit with this peace or this upliftment or this love. And you think, where in the world did that come from? I wasn't even particularly thinking about God in the moment. And it didn't come from nowhere. It came from your investment that you made while you were meditating. And then it came with grace. So it is both our own individual effort, which is absolutely required. We can't just sit on our hands and think everything's going to happen. We have to make the effort. Papa used to chant God all the time, but it wasn't just simply a discipline with him. He was in love with God. He was transformed by God. He was so lifted up, and as he chanted the name, he felt God's bliss. And I have felt this so many times in chanting God's name. Now, sometimes I chanted it out loud, and sometimes just mentally. I was not somebody who spoke a great deal or sang a great deal, so my voice would get tired within a short amount of time. But then it would go to mental chanting. And then one time I read where Papa said that actually mental chanting was superior to chanting just with the lips. So I felt all right about that. I felt a little bit bad for a while that I couldn't keep it going on the outside. But it would go on the inside, and I'd feel that upliftment. I feel that purity. And I would practice the Kriya, and I'd feel that current running up and down my spine and brain. And how wonderful that was, how purifying it was. And then the after effect of Kriya, not just doing it, but then feeling afterwards, feeling the upliftment, the peace, the purity. Just holding that, just residing in that. You see, all of these things are purifying. And we grow to love being in that divine presence through chanting, through meditating, through our Kriya practice. We learn to love it. We come to see that it is superior joy to anything that the senses or this world can offer us. Now, that doesn't happen overnight because we have this ego nature, we have this desire nature, and it tries to pull us back down and it obscures that intuition that we know inside. The ego is a pro at being able to entice us, being able to fool us. And we go from a moment of such extreme clarity about God, and suddenly we're just thrust down into the basement, into the darkness, and all of the pulls of this world and this body. This is why it's such a grand adventure. This is why it takes every bit of us to make progress on the spiritual path. This is why we have to be so diligent in body, mind, and soul. I remember going through the causal experiences and God making it so crystal clear to me that our thoughts are creations, and every thought that we think goes out from us, and it has an effect. Now, we have the right to our own privacy. We have the right to our own thoughts. But the truth is that whatever we think has consequences. If we give ourselves into a mood, that mood can carry us away. Suddenly we go downstream with that mood. And it's something that's very comfortable in the moment. It's something that's so familiar to us, and we don't fight it. We just kind of think, well, this is what's happening in the moment. And suddenly we're carried downstream, and we have to fight our way back upstream again to get where we were. And this is one of the things you begin to realize, that every time we go with one of these currents of thought, of feeling, and it takes us away from God, we have to fight our way back to where we started from. And then we can start making progress again. And just that part inside of you, who's just purely for self-interest, begins to realize, I have to pay attention to this. I can't just indulge myself in whatever it is that my mind wants me to do in that moment. Because there's a price to that. There's a penalty to it, if you want to say it that way. It's the law of cause and effect. And if I do that, then I have to work all that much harder to get back where I even started. So why would I do that to myself? And you get very good at catching yourself. You see a thought, you see a desire, you see a mood, and you cut it off instantly. You don't want to indulge it. You don't want to have to pay the price that it's going to take you to get back to where you even started from, much less make any further progress. You see how important that is? It's vastly, hugely important. So let us fine-tune our intuition. As I said in the writing, you touched the fabric of God. Now you have a touchstone because you have that God experience. I don't blame people who have never had a God experience not being interested in God. Just be interested in an idea and not something that's ever appealed to them. But once they have a God experience, they think, my, is this what they've been talking about all this time? This is remarkable. And I can experience more of this. I can have more of that. Now you're talking. Now I see what you mean. Before that, it's just an idea. It's just words. And it has no more meaning than that. But God gives you an experience. And suddenly you touch the fabric of that reality. And that changes you. It changes your existence. Now you have a touchstone. You go, I don't know how much of religion I'm interested in, but I want God experience, or whatever you want to call it. I want that. And now you're on the spiritual path. So think of that God experience. Does that take me closer to that experience? Or does it take me further away? I used to sit sometimes when I was wondering about a decision that I should make. And in my mind, I would surround myself with the masters. There would be Babaji, Larhi Mahashai, Swami Sri Yukteswarji, Master and Mother. It also include Papa, and Mataji, and Swamiji. And I was surrounded. And then I would present the idea that I was entertaining. And sometimes just instantly I knew this is not something I want to present to these masters. And sometimes it was one particular master who would give me a clue. Now, none of them are any of them that are fools. And none of them can be fooled at all by an idea or excuses. Or maybe in my case, it just should be what I want. Because in that moment, it was a very good test. And you think, does this bring me closer to the masters? Would they be happy with this as a decision? Do I feel right about this? And that helps you to hone your intuition. And then, as I said in the writing, you think about, does this lift me closer to God? Does this make me feel closer to God? Or do I actually draw a veil of darkness, a veil of separation around me so that I can indulge myself and do what it is I want to do? I one time was thinking, everything that I do, everything that I say, it's all known. In the astral realms, none of that is hidden. When you meet somebody, you can see their entire history written about them. And it's right there for you to see and for everyone to see. There's nothing to hide. You cannot hide yourself. And so I thought, everything that I do, it's like it's written on the headlines of the newspaper. Well, that kind of makes you stop short sometimes in thinking what you're thinking, in doing what you're doing. What if everybody knew? Jesus said that that which you do in secret shall be shouted from the rooftops. Today, that is being on the internet or being broadcast through the news somehow. Everything that you think, everything that you say, everything that you do, are you proud of it? Would you be bothered whether it was broadcast to one and all? It's something to think about. You think about the times when we've been at our worst in life. And usually, we kind of think we can do it without anybody knowing. Or if I take that thing, if I steal it, nobody will know the difference. And we think we can do it in secret. Or I can have this clandestine affair and no one will know. But God knows. There's a story of the saint. He was teaching his disciples, and he says, I tell you what I want you to do. I want you to each take a chicken here. We have all these chickens. I want you to take it someplace where nobody can see. And I want you to chop its head off, and I want you to bring it back to me. Well, many of the students were dutiful. They went out, they chopped the head off, and they came back. The master just nodded to them, each one, and then another, then another. One last disciple, and he didn't come back, and he didn't come back. 3 days went by. 3 days he hadn't had a wink of sleep. 3 days he had wandered with that stupid chicken, looking for some place where he could cut the head off, and finally he brought back to the master a live chicken. The master said, What? Told you to chop his head off where nobody could see. He said, Master, everywhere I went, I looked at the chicken to cut his head off. The chicken could see. The truth is, God can see you. There is nothing that you can do in secret. And when we do something that goes against God, goes against truth, goes against love, it is like a brick in the wall that we build up between ourselves and God. And if we feel like we are separate from God, it is we ourselves who have built that wall through our own thoughts, our words, and our actions, one by one. And if that wall is big, if it is thick, if it seems impermeable, it is because we ourselves have constructed it. And it is we who have to deconstruct it. We have to make that demand. God, I want you only. God, I stand in your light. I do as I feel directed by you. I always think, will this draw me closer to you or further away? I will always do what pleases the masters. And with each action, each word, each thought that you take in this way, you take that wall apart brick by brick until there is no wall at all left. And there is only you and God. When will that day come? Some of it is just your industriousness at keeping your mind on God. Some of it is due to God's and Guru's grace, because you're not alone in the project. God and Guru helps you. So let us think on this topic of intuition of God's will, discernment of what is the right thing to do. And you will find that as you work on this, you will sharpen your ability to discern what the truth is, what takes you towards the light, what takes you away from the light, what makes God feel closer. It's not always the easy thing. There's a philosopher one time, when faced with any difficult decision, choose the harder choice, because it's usually the right one. It's not exactly what we want to hear, is it? We'd much rather have the easier choice. The truth is, oftentimes God does ask for the harder thing because it purifies us. It makes us stronger. And because of that, you will grow in God consciousness. And that's what it's all about. So it's so wonderful for us to have this time together. And I ask that God bless you with that pure discernment, and that you be sincere in seeking out what God's will is. And through that, you are purified. Through that purification, that discernment gets more instantaneous, more pervasive, and that you are always in tune with God. And even if it seems like it's the harder choice, you realize that it's the best choice. And it's really the easier choice in the long run, because the easy way is easy at the beginning, but it's much harder down the road. There are consequences to it. And so you realize by doing the harder thing, by doing God's will, that you actually save yourself tremendous amounts of troubles and difficulties and consequences, because you have done what God has asked you to do. Om Shri Ram, Jai Ram, Jai Jai Ram. Om Shri Ram, Jai Ram, Jai Jai Ram. Victory to God, victory to the light. God bless you.